raise your hand if you're truly inspired to go to work because of your boss. Are you motivated to give your best effort because you're a team player and are inspired by the direction that your boss is taking you? Well, if you hesitate to give me an answer in the affirmative, it's because more and more Americans are leaving their jobs and becoming uninspired because of upper management. According to a 2022 Gallup survey, it found 50% of employees leave their companies because of their bosses. A Gallup study of more than 7,000 U.S. adults revealed that more than 1 in 2 employees had left their job to get away from their manager or to improve their overall quality of life at least once in their careers. If you're in upper management and you are alarmed by those numbers, I'm glad you stopped by today because I had a conversation with Gregg Vanourek, who has spent more than 3 years in the field of leadership and development. Over the past 3 decades, Vanourek has been on a mission to help people craft their life and work. He's the co-author of Life Entrepreneurs and Triple Crown Leadership. It's a conglomerate of Vanourek's experience in the field of leadership and development and entrepreneurship, and how the two are interconnected to make us great leaders. He provides a roadmap on how to become an elite leader that others want to follow. He joined me this week to engage in conversation about the principles of leadership and how they apply to every aspect of our lives and can help us become and maximize the leader that we want to be. If you're in a position of power, this is a conversation you can't afford to miss. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, Greg, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to talk to you this afternoon all about leadership development. Great to see you, and thank you for a few minutes, my friend.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Greg, I know you work with people all about leadership development and really crafting the lives that they want to live. So tell me about all the great work that you do and your definition of effective leadership.
Yeah, so my work connects the realms of personal development and leadership. So I like to work across areas and bridge them. So I like to think of my work as connecting personal and professional excellence, helping people craft their life and work. And, I got into this a long time ago. Probably the seeds of it started in college when I studied philosophy and had a professor ask us some of the big questions in life, like, why are you here and what do you want to do with your life? And I actually studied a course called Theories of the Good Life in college as well. So I've always been interested in what makes a good life and what makes good work. And so another way to think about my work is I help people lead themselves so that they can lead others and lead change. But I think often we neglect the piece about leading ourselves. And that's taken me into my most recent focus of my work is on the common traps of living and how do we overcome the common traps of living as a function of leading ourselves so that we don't get in our own way and cause problems for the people that we work with when we're leading organizations, leading families, being involved in our community, et cetera, whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we avoid the trap of living, as you say? Let's dive into that. What's the roadmap to do that successfully?
I'm working on a new book. It's tentatively titled Overcoming the Common Traps of Living. And I've identified more than 60 common traps that inhibit our happiness, our quality of life, and our effectiveness, our fulfillment. And so, how you overcome them depends on which traps you're in. My experience of working with people all over the world, from students up to entrepreneurs and CEOs and everything in between, is that we all fall into several traps. So of the 60 plus, maybe we have 5 or 6 that are kind of our traps. And part of what we need to do, besides addressing the specific trap, is bringing the trap into our awareness. Often that we're not aware that we're in a certain trap. So we can be in a trap of like drifting through our lives without really being intentional and alive. We can be comparing ourselves to others. We can be falling into the conformity trap and just sort of doing things the way that others expect. So those are examples. So we need to be aware that we're doing it, set an intention to make some changes, and then take action, take massive action, as Tony Robbins likes to say, and try things, experiment, find out what works for you so that you can claw your way out of the trap.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gregg, tell me, what does it mean to you to live life with intention?
Yeah, so I think, these days we're all very busy. If you're a leader, a manager, an entrepreneur, even just, if you're leading a family or involved in your community, there's a lot that's coming at us. We've got the news, the breaking news. We got our social media feeds. We got emails or Slacks or chats or whatever requests on our time. And so it's easy to fall into the trap of just kind of sleepwalking. And maybe we're productive, but we've got our head down and we're just kind of going for the latest dopamine hit of knocking out those emails, responding to what's coming in over the transom, as opposed to really rising above it and saying, who am I? What am I good at? What am I passionate about? What is purposeful? What do I need to do to make the biggest difference in whatever it is I'm involved with? And really be intentional. And so that notion is crafting your life and work with a sense of vision and intentionality. And it goes back to one of the books that I co-authored with Christopher Gergen. We wrote a book called Life Entrepreneurs. And so it's the notion of being the entrepreneur of your life. Instead of being deployed by others and just going with the flow, doing the least common denominator, we say, what is my vision? What is my calling? What is my purpose? What are my values? And how do I actualize those in the world? So that's what we mean by living and leading intentionally.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gregg, I'm going to share just a little bit about myself, buddy. So I was born with cerebral palsy, and I always tell people that we're all given a deck of cards, and it's up to us to shuffle them in our favor. And I have to ask you, and I'm fascinated to ask you about it. What do you think it means to be an inclusive leader where all voices are heard and valued? What do you think that means?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question because the notion of inclusion is one of the big themes of our time. It's one of the big gaps I think we have in our workplaces. We have not been doing a good job for many, many years of having workplaces that are inclusive. And so to me, inclusive means it's a place where people are truly invited in to participate fully according to their best efforts and their skills and whatnot, and they truly feel that, right? And so it's got to be felt and not just some kind of slogan or just some kind of program or campaign. And it's connected to three other things. And so I like to really think of the combination of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And these are also things that we haven't been doing well. We have not been doing a job of having a truly diverse workplace where we bring in intentionally and we welcome and we value the different perspectives, experiences. And a lot of people think of it in terms of racial diversity, gender diversity, but it's also diversity of age, experience, background, disability, etc., just different traditions and experiences of life. And we want to have that diversity and also a sense of equity, where there's fairness, where there aren't implicit or unconscious biases that are holding people back, that are excluding people. And then not only inclusion, but you want a sense of belonging, where in that workplace, we are together as a team and even more like a family because we share a purpose, we share values, we share vision. And thankfully, even though we're not doing a good job on these four fronts, there are some examples of places that are really making an effort to do better on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So we're starting to make some progress, but I think we have a long, long way to go.
It's a continual conversation, isn't it?
No, it really is. Yeah. And so, for example, I work in leadership as well as entrepreneurship, and I've seen some examples. So if you look at some of the tech companies, I think Google and Facebook and companies like SAP have made significant efforts to bring in more kind of neurodiverse people. I lived in Sweden for 10 years, Kevin, and there's actually a family-owned hamburger chain there called Max. And they really made an effort to employ more people with mental disabilities and to be more inclusive in their workforce. I'm based in Colorado here, and south of Denver, where I live in Colorado Springs, there's a nonprofit organization called Blue Star Recyclers that does a lot of recycling and refurbishing of electronics. And they really do a lot of outreach for people with autism and other disabilities to try to bring them and include them into their workforce as part of their mission, while also being financially sustainable and innovative and successful, et cetera. So I think it is a conversation. You're seeing more, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gregg, you kind of touched on this earlier, but I'll give it to you in a formal question. And I'm curious how you think that leaders can use their practical experience in both life and work to be effective leaders that people can trust. How can leaders really humanize themselves in order to get their employees or teams to really follow their lead?
Well, I really want to highlight one of the words that you said there, which was like leaders that people can trust. And I think you really put your finger on something very important. There's been some really interesting work for decades of surveying people in terms of what do you look for? What are the characteristics that you want in a leader? And the number one thing, Kevin, this comes from Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, is we want our leaders to be honest. First and foremost, we want them to be honest. And that's obvious so we can trust them. Other top answers are we want them to inspire, we want them to be competent, forward-looking, etc. But honesty has been consistently at the top. And this goes across cultures. And so I think from my experience, we really want to be trustworthy as leaders. And as part of that, it's a two-way street. We also need to extend trust to people that we work with and not micromanage or control them. And then different traits of if I have character and if I show integrity and courage, if I am open with my communication and I am transparent, if I'm a little bit vulnerable in disclosing things about myself, if I'm reliable and responsible, if I take responsibility for mistakes, and proactive, these are things that I can do as a leader to build trust and credibility, as well as the competence that we all need to show when we work. That really, and there's research on this where it really has all sorts of benefits. There's a business case for trust where things move faster. There's less costs and less inefficiencies, et cetera. So if you look at people like Robert Whipple or Stephen M.R. Covey, they're talking about the benefits of trust, but we really need to do that systematically. And by the way, if we screw that up, it can really set us back. So you really want to be thoughtful and intentional about maintaining that, what they call the trust bank account.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Greg, I also know that you spent some time as a startup executive, and you're now a co-founder as well for New Mountain Ventures. So I know you were successful in drumming up sales for both ventures. So I'm wondering how your experience as an entrepreneur and in leadership positions really has helped to form sort of your philosophy on leadership.
Yeah, so I've really learned a lot. I've been a student of leadership as well as a practitioner and a speaker and writer about it. So K12, for example, was an online education startup where I was a senior executive, and that became a scale up. It scaled up to $1 billion in sales in roughly 12 years or so. I was with them for the first 4 years of the startup. And so I learned a ton through that experience, as well as co-founding New Mountain Ventures and having my own businesses. And one of the ways I learned was really being stretched outside of my comfort zone and being in a position where I was fresh out of business school with my MBA and with a lot of responsibility, not only for a team that was leading a really exciting part of the business, the school development, which was like a business development function, which ended up driving the preponderance of the revenues of the startup, but also making that responsible for the company, because we were in this incredible growth, but cash was at a premium. So if we didn't do a good job on our team, the company was severely at risk of insolvency. So that responsibility that came with it. Another thing that I kind of was really helpful for me in terms of my development, Kevin, was working with different kinds of people who are different from me, and then different stakeholders. I had to work with the board and the senior management team, with customers, with suppliers and vendors, and the media consultants and whatnot, and really understanding where they're coming from, what's their point of view, what's their business model, or what's their interest, I think. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that it really was formative for me in terms of understanding who I am and what I like and what I'm good at. So in terms of my personal purpose, my personal values, my vision of the good life, my strengths and my passions, those kinds of experiences were very illuminating for me to figure out the kinds of things that I do like, and the environments that are good for me, and the ones that I choose not to be part of. And just paying attention to that, and not falling into things, but deliberately making changes when there's no longer a good fit. Those were some real good takeaways for me during my business career.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, how do you think you define business resiliency? When you hear that term, being resilient in business, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah. So I've actually looked at the work of a couple people on this, and I'll add my own thoughts. So Tony Schwartz talks about an ability to withstand significant stresses and challenges, and then also to be able to improve from that. And then I think Paul Tollner is a friend and former colleague of mine. He's got a new book out called Reinventing Resilience that's really good, that talks about this. And he talks about the courage. I've got to hear the courage and the confidence to grow through challenges. And so to me, those are really good ways to think about resilience. And I think this is a very topical issue with all of us coming out of the pandemic and all the challenges personally, professionally, and on our workforces. And the thing that I would add is, to be resilient personally and in our business, we need to really play the long game and think about not only being able to survive the challenges today, but to not burn ourselves out tomorrow. So to be able to kind of endure. And that brings me to the work that I did with my dad. My dad and I were co-authors of a leadership book called Triple Crown Leadership. And the Triple Crown is three things. It's what kind of leadership to be: number one, excellent; number two, ethical; and number three, enduring. And all those three together will make you a resilient organization if you focus on how to be excellent and ethical and endure or sustain over time. So you got to be able to play the long game as well as do what's required today in the short run.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, when outside of hosting this podcast, I also help business leaders amplify the hiring of people with disabilities. And one of the things I always tell leaders and business people is the idea and concept of really challenging themselves to be 1% better than they were the day before. So how do you think we can challenge business leaders to be 1% better than they were the day before in order to be a present leader or someone that they want to follow?
I love that. I think some focus on trying to get that huge leap forward, but your point, that kind of 1% better, that kind of consistent improvement, just showing up, doing the work, trying to look for ways to improve. If you do that over time, it compounds, just like compound interest. And so it's actually really powerful, that systematic effort in one direction to kind of improve certain areas. So I'm a big believer in that as well.
Yeah, and I also know that you've given TEDx talks about the idea and focusing on discovering who you are and your value story to avoid, as you said, burnout and sort of a complacency as business leaders. So tell me, what's the biggest lesson you hope to really convey to business people when you talk to them personally? And talk to me about discovering your value story, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so for me, I think I've done a lot of work with being on the management team and companies, being entrepreneurial, teaching leadership, writing about leadership for many years. And one of the things that I observe is that a lot of us take leading ourselves for granted. We want to get right to the advanced skills of negotiation and business modeling and strategic planning and all these kinds of things. And all of those, operational excellence, all of those are obviously important. We need to do those well and create an environment where people can thrive. But we tend to skip over this notion of leading ourselves first. And that will get us into trouble. Number one is we're going to lose the trust, Kevin, that you and I were talking about a few minutes ago. We're not good at leading ourselves. If our health is falling apart, if we're not good at our personal lives and our relationships and whatnot, people will see that and they'll say, they will come to conclusions about our character and our priorities. And so you really can't skip over it. It's going to come back to bite you. So we really need to be deliberate and systematic about leading ourselves first, to have the privilege of leading others. And another big lesson or theme that showed up is the importance of people. I learned from my dad, who had a distinguished career in business, leading companies and turnarounds. And he's always told me, Greg, business is a set of relationships. And if you look at leadership, so much of it is the relationship between leaders and followers. And even the dance. It's not that there's one leader who's always making the decisions. It's a dance where leaders and followers sometimes leadership will ebb and flow. And you want to create a culture of other leaders who can step up with their ideas and their initiative and their leadership, their creativity. And so the importance of relationships, which is going to bring you to things like emotional intelligence and social, psychological safety, and again, back to trust, back to character, back to ethics, etc. So I think and those go to your personal values as well as the shared values of the organization. We don't want them to be platitudes. We want them to be alive and breathing so that people know that we are truly a values-based team together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, how do you think you define business prosperity? What does it mean to you to be prosperous in business?
Yeah, so it's a great question, I think. And once again, a lot of people skip over it and they get right to kind of being busy with operations and trying to get, the revenues up or the costs down. And so in our work in Triple Crown Leadership, we we come back to what is your quest? So if you're asking me about what does business prosperity mean, I'll say, what is our quest as an organization? And what is my quest as a leader? And this goes back to Stephen R. Covey, who said, begin with the end in mind. And so for us, the way we answer that question is, what kind of organization does it take to be excellent and ethical and enduring? And so to me, if you're all three of those, that's what business prosperity means. And let me just define those real quick, just to be a little more specific. So by excellent, we mean achieving exceptional results and having positive impacts on stakeholders, not just shareholders, but your workers, customers, suppliers, your community, right? The second one, ethical, which is doing the right thing, even when it's costly or hard, when the pressure is on. So in other words, it's about how do you get the results? Do you do it ethically? And the third one, enduring, is about standing the test of time and operating sustainably, such that you have resilience, like we talked about earlier. So to me, business prosperity is about being excellent and ethical and enduring. In other words, getting great results the right way over time. And so to me, that's true prosperity, but that's exceedingly rare. It's very difficult, but it's very much worth aspiring to as our collective quest.
Yeah, and when we look at sort of the future of global entrepreneurship and leadership, I'm wondering if you can forecast the future for me, and what do you see as emerging trends or sort of the through line between where leadership is today and where you think it is going in business and beyond, my friend? What do you think is the future of leadership and business?
Well, it's hard to predict. It's hard to know. There's so many variables. There's so much complexity in the world. But one of the things that I see right now is I really believe that we're in a moment of an epic battle about the way we view business and its purpose and its role in society. And just to be more specific, I think there's kind of one way of thinking that is very focused on short-term profits and shareholders as the prime stakeholder, where we say the purpose of business is about maximizing the value for the shareholders, and everything else falls out of that. And I think that's a very common belief. It's taught in many business schools and has been for decades. And if you ask a lot of people, they'll kind of assume, yeah, that's exactly what business is and what leadership is all about in the private sector. But the battle is between another viewpoint about that has a different point of view that says, yes, of course, shareholders are important and we need profits and we need growth, but we also want to balance across other stakeholders. So to the point earlier, workers, we talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. What is the experience of the people on your team? Do they have opportunities to grow and develop and support their families and be rewarded and feel a sense of belonging, right? What about your customers and your communities? Are you as a business leader making sure that you're giving back? Are you volunteering? Are you donating some money? Are you adding value? Are you involved with the schools, which is about the future and the resilience of your society and your democracy? We've seen challenges around that. Right. So there's this battle between worldviews. Kevin, what is the purpose of business? What is my job as a leader? And a lot of people don't take the time, I think, to think about that. And by the way, the second point of view has been called conscious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism. And I think this is kind of a battle that's going on. And it's really significant because we're seeing some of the pain points in our communities, a lack of equity and a lack of progress, and also in our world when you look at climate change and some of the impacts, some of the negative impacts, as well as the positive impacts that business is bringing. So I think we really need to decide, what do I believe? What kind of leader do I want to be? Back to being conscious. And what kind of organization and business do I want to drive forward? What's the future? And that brings you into some fun places like social entrepreneurship, social impact, social innovation, et cetera, where you can do some amazing positive things for communities and people in the world while also being profitable and being innovative and driving results and having all the energy of enterprise and capitalism. So it's some pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's all about striking the appropriate balance, isn't it?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think there's a real balance, and I think one of the problems is that it's been unbalanced. It's been kind of way out of whack. If you focus so much on one stakeholder at the exclusion of the others, it's going to take things out of balance, and you're going to have some real problems that are going to come back to bite you. That are actually going to hurt not only the others but also you in the long run, and that's not resilience. Going back to what we talked about a few minutes ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, my final question for you this afternoon has to do with your own personal and professional legacy and how you want that to be defined.
Yeah, so for me, legacy goes back to my personal purpose, values, and vision, which I defined a long time ago, and I've been trying to live up to those. I think if I do a good job of being true to my purpose, values, and vision, that will probably add up to a nice legacy. It's way too much to kind of summarize in full, but I can mention a few things. So for me, my purpose is about helping people lead good lives of integrity, service, and purpose. I want to do that through my values of connecting, love, integrity, courage, service to others, and all in a vision of the good life that includes sort of how I want to show up in the world, what kind of husband I want to be for my wife, what kind of father I want to be for our two daughters, what kind of son and brother and friend and colleague I want to be. And for me, in a lot of the work that I do through my writing and teaching, Kevin, this goes to the legacy that I hope to have professionally, is I want to be engaged in this long conversation like we're doing today, like you do through your podcast, about what matters in our lives and our leadership and our workplace, and to try to inspire people, to try to get them to think about, how do I get better? How do I do more? And it's a timeless conversation. People have been doing that for thousands of years, but sometimes it gets lost in the noise of business and whatnot. And so I want to be involved in that, to be a part of the solution and to help people get a little bit better, be a little bit better, to come home to who they truly are and what their core beliefs are. And so that's what I hope my legacy to be, across the different areas of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, finally, tell me, if people want to get connected with the good work that you're doing, leadership and business, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, several different ways. So we've got a couple websites. My own website is greggvanourek.com. And so that's GreggVanourek.com. And on there, we've got a bunch of free assessments and tools and resources and recommended lists of books for leaders and videos. We also have our triplecrownleadership.com website. I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you search me, Gregg Vanourek, I'm posting a lot of articles. And then on Twitter, I'm also very active at @GVanourek. And you can follow me there in the work in leadership and personal development.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, I certainly enjoyed our conversation about personal development and leadership, your work in the space. And Tom, on my behalf, is most appreciated. I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon. And I want to thank you for being here. It's most appreciated.
It's great to be with you, Kevin. Thanks for having me. All the best.